Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Best Practices for UAC. And we're continuing this series with nominees for the top 20 most influential list here in 2026. And I have with me today somebody I've never gotten to meet in person, Dr. Heidi Haavik or Haavik?
Haavik.
Brilliant.
Yeah. It's
And
an old Norwegian name, so
that's
hard
great.
to pronounce. Yeah.
You know, Heidi, I know and have heard you talk in your research in the profession, but I know you've had a massive influence. You were very high last year on the top 20. I suspect that'll be the case this year. But I think maybe there's still a lot of the profession that's not familiar with your work and your purpose and what's behind what you're doing. So would you mind sharing just briefly kind of your history of where you got to where you're at now and what are you doing now? And then I'd hope to land this with how can this group support you in your body of work? So how did you start on your journey as a chiropractor?
My great-grandfather was one of the first 1,000 chiropractors to ever graduate from Palmer College in 1924.
Oh, brilliant.
So that's BJ's days. I didn't really understand growing up what that meant, but I grew up in Norway, but I was born in New Zealand.
Okay.
And so I've got a Norwegian father and New Zealand mother, hence the dual citizenship. So I went to New Zealand for a 6-month visit just as the New Zealand College of Chiropractic started. And I didn't really fully understand what chiropractic was either, but decided to apply, got in, and I started in 95. And I have a bit of a curious mind, Alan. I needed to know, but how does it work? But why does it work that way? And the old theories didn't really fully explain things satisfactorily for me. So I ended up continuing doing a PhD at Auckland University after I finished chiropractic college. So I was practicing. I had a baby. Actually, did I have two? No, I had my daughter when I started my PhD. So I did some postgraduate papers in neuroscience, ended up doing a PhD in human neurophysiology, and explored the mechanisms. How can we put our hands on people's spines with that little thrust, very specific, very, where that subluxation is, and how can that have such a profound impact on people's moods and function and movement and sleep and health and, it was just, how is that? It can't just be those little squash nerve roots. So it just started me off on a little mission. I ended up being asked to be the research director. I was probably the only one that was doing a PhD in New Zealand other than one person at the time. And I didn't think I was good enough. There's no way I thought I could, I wasn't that smart. I couldn't do that. But, they didn't have many options. And so they hired me. And it's just taken me on this mission that now it's my purpose in life is to enlighten the world about that spine-brain health connection because it is so profound and we have so much evidence now. It's unbelievable.
So let's geek out a little bit. What's the biggest physiological to a layman who maybe has a scientific background, maybe let's even say a medical background? How would you explain in today, from what you've learned through your lens of research, what seems to be our understanding today, the biggest impact? How are we impacting it? Is it through affrontating those proprioceptors and those neurological pathways into the brain? Is it motion? What is it that's having the effect?
We don't know everything yet, Ellen. Just we're really just scratching the surface. But one thing we know for sure now is the importance of the small, deep paraspinal muscles. So the little muscles that go between individual vertebrae, like the multifidi muscles, for example. We know that those atrophy, they become fibrotic, they change fiber types, they have all of these maladaptive or negative changes that occur to them, which alters the communication from the spine to the brain. Turns out that communication is really, really important. And this is what I've spent 25 years studying is when we actually adjust these, not just us, like Joel Picard did some really awesome work, him and his team, looking at and literally recording from the nerves. And it's not so much the joint capsules or things like that that are being signaled when we do adjust the spine, but the muscle spindles, the stretch receptors, and particularly in those small, deep muscles. So we know the adjustment influences or sends this blast of proprioceptive information to the brain, and the brain seems to reboot. It's like we know the brain doesn't really fully pay attention to all the information coming in. It predicts what's happening based on past experiences. And this is actually quite new as well, even in neuroscience. They used to think the brain was constantly changing because of the constantly changing input, but it doesn't. It creates its own story. This is who I am. This is what's happening inside me and around me, including this spinal information. But when we come in and adjust the spine, you send this volley to the brain. It's like the brain reboots and it recalibrates and it goes, whoa, okay, this was wrong and I'll fix that. And that was wrong and I'll fix that. It's why you can adjust someone, say, with a whopping upper cervical subluxation, and they can have almost identical changes when you're adjusting someone's fully blown sacroiliac subluxation, because it's the information from the spine that the brain didn't have that makes the brain pay attention. And when it's paying attention, this is where it corrects itself. And it can correct things like the way it's aware of where your body is, how you move your body, but it gets broader than that. And this is where it gets so interesting for us chiropractors, because this is what we see, right? You have neuroendocrine changes, you have mood changes like anxiety, depression changes, you have changes in organ function, you have, so all these, but you can't really predict it, like it's not like a C2 subluxation causes X, Y, and Z. They tried to do that a few years ago as well, but it's not that simple. It's more complicated, but it's just quite unreal how important that spinal information is for how we learn things, how we learn movements, how we perceive where we are, what's going on, how we feel, how we think about ourselves. We're even showing these large brain network changes now that are responsible for who you are as a human being, as a person, and how you interact with other human beings. And we change these. And this is where it suddenly makes sense now when the patient comes in after an adjustment and it's like they've had that personality change and they're all nice to the CAs, like when they were grumpy as walking in.
There's two places my mind have gone as you're speaking. One is, how often our CAs, people come in hunched over and walk out with this smile. And it was like, if you have any level of awareness, you realize that's the brilliance of what's going on here. But how do we communicate the value of that? But the bigger thing I can't help it, my brain instantly goes to, is these babies that are born with, tractioning with through C-section, through vacuum. And I'm thinking that damage that instantly is done, that's developing the input to that developing brain.
And they'll check a baby's hips, but they won't even bother with the neck. You think, oh my goodness me. We just started now on looking at babies' brains as well. So we're looking at babies that have got some sort of asymmetry in either posture or movements, breastfeeding difficulties, your typical baby that comes and sees a chiropractor anyway. What's upset me the most is that there is a known health trajectory for these kids if they're left alone, if they don't get any care. And it is nasty. It is not nice. The negative outcomes for these kids if they have these asymmetries. And then we know the difference that makes when we go in and check and adjust them. So anyway, we just started that. I'm mixing here I am a chiropractor myself. I'm not just a brain scientist. So I see both sides. I practiced before I knew any of this neuroscience. I took care of babies all the time, whole families. So I know what can change, but that is one of the main drivers for me too. Is those babies deserve care?
Absolutely. Could not be in more alignment with you there. And there's the science behind it. Question. This is from my old 25-year-old knowledge, but have you found there are more receptors, proprioceptors input in the cervical spine than the rest of the spine? Or are those multifidi muscles and just all those small paraspinal muscles equally impacting the input to the brain, or is it really more located densely in the upper cervical area?
So there is some evidence, and again, this isn't my research. This is me looking at other people's research that have actually gone in and they've taken 1 gram of muscle tissue from, say, for example, a biceps or a triceps or a trapezius, and then they've gone in and taken 1 gram of muscle from some of these small paraspinal muscles. And what's really fascinating is just how much more muscle stretch receptors are in these small muscles around the spine. So that's the whole spine.
Yeah.
But some of these upper cervical muscles are even higher again.
Okay.
Which to me explains why the hole-in-one thing, why that upper cervical care
Had an impact.
on its own can work. It doesn't mean, you can have also influences from sacral. You can even have influences from,
Sure.
adjusting a wrist and an arm
Yeah.
or an ankle or whatever. But it sort of explains the whole
Yeah.
gamut of the profession, which I think is quite funny too.
So give us a little insight into the world of research. I guess the two broad questions are who pays for it?
Yep.
Where's the funding come from? And how do you decide where to point your energy to? And then how long does that take? And then when do you start the next project? Just kind of give us some insight into how do you even navigate that world, both
Oh, it's
financially
been
and
an
then
absolute nightmare to begin with because
I
it was a brand new field. I mean, chiropractic neuroscience didn't exist, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
There was
Wow.
a few people like Philip Bolton and Joel Picard and Chuck Henderson and a few of these guys. Um, oh, I'm forgetting the guy here now. But anyway, that did some of this really early research. But they showed that there were some reflexive changes, so we've got some milliseconds of reflexive changes.
Huh.
But, like when you do research, you have to make sure that your methodology is sound and you get your paper reviewed by people that can review that methodology, because otherwise you can't trust the conclusions, right? You need to make sure the
Sure.
methods are right. So there are hardly any chiropractic neuroscientists on the planet. So in the early days, Alan, we sent off our research articles to neuroscience journals, and they could not understand what I was talking about when I was trying to describe the subluxation and that we were applying our adjustments to a subluxation. So that was a whole nightmare. That took years. In the early days, it could take up to like 9-10 years from the
Wow.
beginning to the end of a paper being published from start to end. We've had to beg, borrow, and steal. We've written grants. I've crowdfunded. It is a nightmare to get money because it's the funding that drives the projects. But I have been a little bit mad, you might say, and I'm sure you'll hear that from many people. But I had such an insane drive that was the only thing that really mattered to me. So if I couldn't do what I wanted to do, I'd rather not take the money. Like this is what
Oh.
I want to do. So, and I also feel like most of the funding that we've had for at least a lot of my research and my team, I have a big team, by the way, it's not just me. I mean, don't give me the credit
How
for
big? How many
the
people?
work. We started out with me and one part-time person in 2006, and we're now over 35 people just in my research center.
Wow.
So I think we're the largest chiropractic research center on the planet,
That's
and
fabulous.
it takes millions of dollars to run. So yeah, we now beg, borrow, and steal, and we write grants that are non-chiropractic. And I give you an example, which is devastating to me, because if we just had the money to have all of these people just doing chiropractic research, we would be exponentially producing more relevant research. But my team have to write these non-chiropractic grants to get the $1 million, of which 500,000 goes to the project, but the other 500,000 is called overheads. Now, the beauty of our president at the New Zealand College of Chiropractic is he doesn't take the overheads. We get that second 500,000 to do
Right.
chiropractic research.
Yeah.
So there's ways around it, but the money is the biggest thing
bet.
that we're lacking. Because if we just had the funds, I'd just get my team,
Yeah,
working
cranking
even
out,
harder and faster. Because
which
you
is
would not
inter
believe the projects we're doing right now. We're doing large 12-week clinical trials. We're looking at things like brain-derived neurotrophic factors, epigenetic changes, so the genes that are turning on and off with chiropractic care, these baby studies that are starting out now, baby brain research. I mean, it's just unreal. But you see, you really need to follow these babies once we get them under chiropractic care, right?
Yeah,
To see then, well, what
absolutely.
about their outcomes 20 years down the track? Are they much healthier? Are they functioning better? But,
Yeah.
all of that costs so much money.
So couple questions. So are grants the primary driver of how you fund this? Or if you had to look at the
Not
percentage of
anymore.
private donation, the college contributing, is it grants the biggest? And are they
College is
grants from
always,
New Zealand or all over the world?
all over the world,
Okay.
yeah. I have a stand-in grant, for example, from NCMIC in the
Mhm.
US.
Yeah.
So that's a great help to us. We've always been supported by the Australian Spinal Research Foundation, so we put in grants every year, and pretty much every year we've received a grant, one of the team members. A Hamlin Trust in New Zealand, it's small, but they've been there all along. The New Zealand College has a supporters program, so there's 100% of the money that's donated there, which can also be tax deductible. We get 100% of it, and we can use it to whatever we prioritize. Another study that we're doing at the moment is, I don't know about you, but I believe that intent matters where we are at as chiropractors. And we're
Absolutely.
literally measuring now, because we finally have equipment. We've got 2 whole EEG setups. Actually, we've got 3 or 4, but we shouldn't go there. But we can actually measure from the chiropractor and the patient at the same time. Because what we are expecting is that our patient's brain synchronizes with ours. We see this in, for example, mothers with newborn babies. But, how do you find a research body that would fund an
You,
intent study?
you know why
It's
that's
not
important?
easy.
No, and why that's important, Heidi, is with the world of AI, and it's not hard to know somebody's gonna have a machine that can, we don't need chiropractors, we can just have this machine that scans and gives a thrust, and I've
No,
always wondered, but you're
no,
removing that connection that anybody who's practiced as a chiropractor can
knows.
appreciate, like, when you're in
Yeah.
that state of presence and gratitude and love and
Yes.
certainty, what
Yes.
happens versus when you're distracted by your phone or the CA or the last
Exactly.
patient, and
Exactly.
I've
Or if you
wondered.
dislike the person in front of you. Like, I mean,
Yes.
I've always sent them, to a colleague. If I don't feel love for that person in front of me, I won't do anything. I look, I
Yeah,
I have a colleague, and he has a much better technique than me, and I think that would suit you better, because I just don't feel like it's right.
yeah,
That's how much I, again, believe in that whole intent thing. I think where we're at matters so much. I also think skill level matters. So we're starting to look at, like, really brilliant chiropractors, and then trying to compare them with, say, less brilliant chiropractors. Student care, right? When you're thinking about the mechanism, you're thinking about your steps. It's not the same as when you're in that loving gratitude,
absolutely.
intent, wanting to make that person a happier, healthier being. It's
Yeah,
different.
that's fantastic. Uh, so I have a question for you, and I know this could be a long answer, but I still, I've belonged to every Facebook group there is in chiropractic, and I'm still always shocked at that camp that just looks at a body like your work of what a quack, subluxation doesn't exist. What you've spent your life researching this, and you even said you had to kind of rectify that before you could move on with the work you're doing now. So, what's your immediate response to that group in our profession that just denies the subluxation, and what? How would you address that?
I think that there's beliefs out there, and so people have beliefs, and then sometimes mistaken beliefs. I think there's a group of people that think that we who believe in a subluxation. I mean, it's not like it's. I mean, it fucking exists anyway. Excuse me, but it's what I've studied for 25 years, and I'm a PhD in neuroscience. So you know. Anyway, but I think they just believe that we think it's some sort of spiritual, heals everything, type of thing, which I don't.
Yeah.
I don't see it that way. I know it can have a profound impact right the way through to our spirituality, because we're impacting things like these default mode networks that are like the soul of a human being, like how
Mhm.
you view yourself. So it can influence pretty much everything. So, honestly, my take on it is, I just feel a little bit sorry for them for being ignorant and not reading the latest science, because there is a large body now. Maybe not large. There is a growing, significant body in so many different countries now around the world, with different techniques, different methodologies. It's sort of beyond a doubt now. And so, when things change, when people change, first they fight you, and first they fight you, and then they eventually turn around and oh no,
Yeah,
we've always believed in Heidi's work. So it'll
yeah,
come around. It used to really upset me, and because a lot of these guys who I looked up to, but I just figured, it's a difference. They're not neuroscientists, so you got to forgive them for not knowing what I know. I know what I know.
sure.
I know it's what it is.
Is
I
it
speak to
still
neuroscientists, Alan, and I can convince a neurophysiologist about a subluxation and the impacts of chiropractic care, that they have a neuroplastic effect on the brain, like a rebooting of the brain. I can talk to them in 5 minutes. They're like, oh yeah, well, what else could it be? I mean, that makes perfect sense. But but some chiropractic academics, it's like, oh my God.
so
Anyway,
is the model of, sort of it being a group of things, it's abnormal motion, it's abnormal affrontation, it's muscle spasm, I forget the 5, that was an older model.
an older
Is that
model.
always kinda made sense to me that this almost I would, in my mind, I correlate it with some other like maybe how they would diagnose autism or something. It's not one thing. There's a list of things that, seem to make it up. Is that sort of where you're defining a subluxation now, or is it more specific to one diagnosable thing, or is it because in my mind, I know there's an area I've felt, and there's several things happening there with spasm, with heat, with abnormal motion, and how's that impacting the neuromechanical receptors, but how would you describe that?
It's definitely complex. But see, our understanding of things like pain has changed in the last 20 years, just like our understanding of so many things. It's a multifactorial, multi-system thing. So when we're talking about a subluxation having all these different components, absolutely. We know that, but it's all about this loop that's impacting the brain's understanding about what's going on, and the brain's impact then on us and our physiology and how we feel and control our hormones and neurotransmitters and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So it's absolutely complicated. It's definitely, but the easiest way to describe it, like I'll describe it to, say, neurophysiologists, is that it's a abnormal motor control problem of the spine, and what that means isn't just that the messages, the muscle messages are wrong, but the perception of what's happening in the spine is also wrong. So the brain isn't aware of what's going on in the spine, so it's not controlling the movement pattern appropriately. The problem is our spine represents the core of the body. So the core of the body even influences how your brain interprets where it interprets sounds coming from. You go right back to Harvey Lillard, right, with the deafness and the adjustment, and he could hear again. And that used to be pooh-hooed and laughed at. Well, we can explain that now with the latest contemporary neuroscience model, is that it's not that there's anything wrong with the hearing and the hearing going to the temporal lobes on the opposite side, but it's a problem with how the brain is interpreting sound that's changing. Because you need to know where you are to interpret where sound is coming from. You need to know where your core is to understand where your arms and legs are, because your arms and legs are attached to the core of your body.
Oh.
So if you don't know what's going on in your spine, you can't be aware of your arms. So you can have clumsiness. This is where the motor eye-hand coordination, motor control, eye movements, reading, hearing. This is where learning at school, but we also, like, the parts of the brain that we know we change. Like, I couldn't have made this shit up. I'm not that smart. It's like, we just keep following the data, but it's taken us to, like, we know now that we're changing this part behind the forehead called the prefrontal cortex, which is like the director of your brain and of your life. How you experience who you are, how you feel, how you interpret others and their behaviors and their emotions, how you plan, decide, make decisions, how you accomplish things. Like, this is the part of the brain that we know we're changing. And we're also changing cerebellum. We know a whole lot of other brain regions as well, but it's a really fascinating journey. And I absolutely love it, So, I mean, I'm honored to be nominated for this thing, but it's an absolute pleasure to do it.
We're honored to have you. I've got to ask you one other question I've wondered for years. I've always, I would synthesize what you're saying that the public doesn't quite understand yet is the reason chiropractic should be used as part of your lifestyle to give your body the best possible chance to express health and its full potential, um, is a wearable. And I'm like, if you had, the way these wearables work, and I've always wondered, though, that's hard to create a wearable for the neurology of the brain, but I've always wondered, because
Not
I have
necessarily.
seen EEGs
Not
and how, when
necessarily.
people, when you're fight or flight, you're mostly, your hindbrain firing, and when you're creative and in love, the frontal cortex. And I've just always wondered, do you think there's a time, because I think what would point people to chiropractic faster than a wearable that somehow showed them how their frontal cortex is not operating how it should right now, and it's time for an adjustment, and it just immediately removes pain from the equation, and it makes chiropractic this completely different thing that I think we know it could be used for. Do you think that's something that could be in the horizon for our profession?
It's already under construction.
Awesome.
My number one research team member, he now runs the whole lab, Imran Khan Niazi, is probably one of the world leading bioengineers. In New Zealand, he is the expert in artificial intelligence and, using machine learning. And he has set up a whole technology transfer office. So we've got quite a lot of incredible, we've turned it around too. So it's all within the chiropractic vitalistic model. So it's the scientist that owns their designs, not the universities. So even the college, we just take a small cut, but it's about the people and their ideas. And again, it's all about enabling human beings to live at their optimal potential, and how can we best predict that, and what are the best measures for that. And there are multiple things under construction right now that is literally about basically our brain health. And it won't just be spinal function that impacts it, but we're starting to pick out, like Imran told me just the other day, he goes, Heidi, if I've got 5 minutes of your EEG, I can tell whether you've ever been adjusted before or not. And I'm going, what? I need to know how.
Awesome.
So, there is some really cool stuff coming, really cool. And this is something that the profession can invest in. And through that, it's our latest model as well of how we can raise more money for research.
Heidi, I got the tiniest touch of how important research is to a practicing chiropractor when I might even have the name wrong. I think it was a study, maybe Dick Holtz was his last name, out of Chicago, and it had something to do with blood pressure being impacted by an adjustment. This was probably 15 years ago, and it was fascinating just talking about that with practice members, how many referrals came in. And so it is my belief that every practicing chiropractor, this is probably the most indirect and yet direct marketing dollar you could spend, is providing a body of research that takes this and gives explanation to the world about the impact we have. So how does somebody support you? How do they donate? Where do they go to directly contribute to work that I think, and that's a fear and maybe a knock on science the last few years, is how manipulated it has become with pharmaceuticals and the influence. And so where do they go that they can contribute to work you're doing that will actually impact?
We don't have pharmaceutical companies that fund us.
Yeah,
we often crowdfund. I've almost given up, though, asking the profession to directly fund our research because it's really, really tricky to do. But I agree with you. And there are people out there that do support us, and we really, really appreciate that. So there's a direct route that your 100% of your dollars will go directly to the research. We also have put together a translation of the science, both for chiropractors and for the patients. So if you want to communicate this science, because there's now, 20 years I've been doing this. So I break down the studies again and translate them into, understandable language. So that's called Chiro's Hub. It's all on my HeidiHaavik.com website. You'll be able to find these links there. But there there's a membership. So you're part of the membership. You get all of these translated pieces, and if you want to learn more, there's classes that you can learn from as well. If you just want to get it out to your patients, we have the lowest level, then we just send it out to your patients. You get a QR code for your clinic, and it just goes out to them. So there's multiple different routes. There's the direct through the New Zealand College of Chiropractic, where the research lab is, or there's this, HeidiHaavik.com. There's the Chiro's Hub thing there. I do classes, master classes. If you just want to, occasionally hear about the latest science. I think I've got one coming up in August about the impact of chiropractic on mental health, in particular anxiety and depression, what the evidence is and what the mechanisms are. So I can send you all these links if you'd like to. I'd love it if you would share. Yeah.
We'll have Krista share it in the notes for the show. Well, Dr. Heidi, that was fantastic. I could talk to you for hours. My friends, I graduated with Patrick McMahon, who's with Syntropy, and Aaron Morris doing their adjusting technique, and we would just call these conversations mind candy. And so thank you for the work you're doing, and happy to see the profession acknowledging the work you're doing. We're at almost 12,000 people engaged with this year's Ultimate Influencer list for chiropractors. That'll be released in August, and I know you'll be right up there, if not at the top. So, Dr. Heidi, any last thoughts before I let you go?
I think most chiropractors don't quite realize, or they're losing a little bit of their understanding of just how profound that adjustment actually is on human health and potential. And I hope if anything to just, what you're doing, guys, it's incredible. And it really has a dramatic impact on someone's brain function, which influences their life, health, and function as well. So don't lose sight of that now that people are getting more and more complicated and the world's getting a little bit more tricky. And also get checked yourself. I find a
Yeah.
lot of chiropractors don't look after themselves. I get checked weekly now, if not twice a week, and I
love
have
it.
for years. Makes such a
Good.
difference. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Doc. Appreciate your time
Thanks,
and
Alan.
congrats on the nomination. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Bye.